The hippie aesthetic and its effects on United States culture. Hello, my name is Anthony Callie, and today I'd like to talk about the hippie aesthetic and how it had an impact on American culture that still rings true today. The hippie aesthetic. First, I'd like to define what the hippie aesthetic actually was. In the late 60s to early 70s, rock music became focused on musical and technological craft. Combining this with a distinctly artistic approach, the hippie aesthetic of music was born. The basic idea behind this aesthetic was that the rock musician is an artist who has responsibility to produce sophisticated music using whatever means are at his or her disposal. The music should be able to stand up to repeated listening, and the lyrics should deal with important themes and issues. Musical prowess became especially valued, and the musicians and listeners both began taking their music very seriously. Hippie icons. Some hippie icons at the time were Jefferson Airplane, The Grateful Dead, and Janis Joplin. Based on these pictures and the musician's appearance alone, it is clear that they had influence on the hippie aesthetic. What the hippies were about. The hippie culture was all about not conforming to the normal standards of middle class life. They began the trend of wearing their hair long and also growing long beards. There was a ton of drug exploration and experimentation, with mainly heavy weed usage and LSD becoming very prominent in their circle. Hippies had much looser stance on sex, which was very taboo at the time, and they were known for exploring different spiritualities and religions outside of the normal Judeo Christian traditions of the time. They were searching for more meaning to life besides working a 9 to 5 and starting families. They all wanted something more. Hippies were all about peace and love. It was a motto for them. This led them to grow their own communities outside of cities and fight for human rights during the many different counterculture movements going on at the time. These included the civil rights movement, gay rights and women's liberation activists, and other political radicals. One important one I'll talk about later is our heavy opposition to the Vietnam War. Here are some pictures of hippies during that time. You can see the long, shaggy hair that both men and women have and their loose, colorful clothing. The peace sign is essentially the logo for hippies and is something that is seen in many places today. Woodstock. The biggest counterculture gathering in history was created by hippies. That would be Woodstock. Woodstock was a music festival in Bethel, New York, where about 400 to 500,000 hippies were in attendance. Hippie artists like Jimi Hendrix, The Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, and Jefferson Airplane all played. Woodstock's slogan was 3 days of peace and music, and that's what the festival ended up being. This was a very important festival because it proved that peace and love were still able to be achieved even during the social and political problems that were running rampant in America. Although the festival was extremely overcrowded and heavy rain stopped the show at the time, these setbacks did not stop Woodstock from being a major success. This was a crucial point to show how great the hippie countercultural movement could be, and it was surrounded by music. Woodstock is also influential to the culture of festivals in America, as it could be seen as the blueprint for big ones. After 50 years, Woodstock is still remembered extremely fondly and is a major part of U.S. history. Hippies against Vietnam. The hippies were obviously very anti war, as it was against the peace and love that they stood for. With the Vietnam War going on during this time, the hippies began to make their voices heard with a clear anti war agenda. One protest they had was the First Human Being, where 30,000 hippies were brought together in the Golden Gate Park to express their being anti war. Months later, with many different political groups, including Martin Luther King, over 20,000 anti war protesters marched through both New York and San Francisco, with 150,000 in New York and 60,000 in San Francisco. One thing to come out of this hippie movement was their anti war mindset was togetherness. This peace movement united hippies with straight politicos, GIs from around the country, Harvard draft resistors, musicians, doctors, artists, men, women, and so many more groups. The power they had in numbers and influence over the rest of the country is still thought about and taught about today in schools across the country, as they helped mold history and the way that people think about the war in Vietnam. Hippies today. Although there are not really any hippies today, the influence they had on the United States and their culture is still evident. Long hair and beards, tie-dye clothing, and peace signs being everywhere. These are just a few of the things hippies started that are normal in society today. Although hippies are sometimes seen as pot smoking stoners who care about nothing more than dancing and having a good time, it is clear that this is not true. Hippies stood for what they believed in and were a crucial part of uniting the country in the late 60s and 70s, and they are not given the credit they deserve. And this entire hippie movement and aesthetic was all started because of music.